Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others, Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed. And after 3 days, rise again. He said all of this quite openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said to him, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "Those who want to become my followers must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Now those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
In almost every possible way, today's reading is at the center of the gospel that Mark shares with us. It stands nearly exactly at the center of Mark's story, quite literally. Half of what Mark says comes before, and half comes after what we hear today. It is the first time in context that Jesus is named Messiah, Christ. It is also the major transition point in this story, the place where the focus switches from Jesus opposing all that oppresses God's people by healing, feeding, casting out demons, and opening hearts, where it switches from that to Jesus journeying toward the cross, toward death, and toward resurrection. But as much as today's gospel is this kind of center, at its heart, at its crux, it is where the good news of Jesus Christ vividly and succinctly summarizes the essence of the kingdom of God. Captured within this gospel is even a little more, almost a selfie, if you will, a snapshot that shows us why it is so hard for us to receive and accept this news. So how do we get to this point? Well, the basic story is simple enough. Jesus and his disciples have been all over Galilee, travelers in the Holy Land, back and forth across the Great Lake up to Sidon and Tyre, over to the cities of the Decapolis, and now they are on the outskirts of that Roman town, Caesarea Philippi. There, Jesus asked them two important questions. Who do people say that I am? And perhaps even more importantly, who do you say that I am? The disciples answer both questions, first with comparison to important biblical, scriptural figures. And second, they answer with Peter's flash of insight that Jesus is no mere miracle worker, no mere prophet, but is indeed God's anointed one, the Messiah, the Christ. But then comes that central turning point in the heart of Mark's story. Jesus begins to explain what it means to be the Messiah. And no one, not even Peter, can believe it. Why? Because the disciples, the Jewish people, the Gentiles, everyone, all of them are looking for a powerful leader. Someone who can win the election. Someone who can take charge. Someone who can trump the Romans and make Israel great again. Someone who can bring glory. And so they're quite disappointed with Jesus' announcement, aren't they? And let's face it, wouldn't we be also? Wouldn't our world be the same? More often than not, don't we look for God to come in strength? Don't we look for God to work through the power of presidents or the catchiness of a hashtag? Don't we look for God to wield the instruments of money and finance? Don't we look for God to strike down and wipe away our enemies? Don't we look for God to award, reward, and gift people with what they deserve, whether that is much or little? We look for God to come like this, and not for God to come to us in weakness. In the same weakness that we see within ourselves. In the weakness that we can see in others. That is at least a portion of what Jesus is telling us today that is important about God. We may not get the Messiah or the God we want, but in Jesus we encounter the God we need. A God who does not overwhelm us, but meets us in our brokenness in order to heal and to restore and to redeem us. But there is more. Jesus doesn't leave this central message open-ended. He goes on to further instruct and teach what this message means to the disciples, to the larger crowds, and to us. You might find that what Jesus teaches is perhaps familiar, or perhaps you're finding it new. But the central lessons of his words can be summed up in these three phrases. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and to save your life, you must lose it. Of course, with the hindsight of Good Friday and Easter Sunday, we can open our vision to how important this idea of losing your life is to the good news of Christ. Indeed, it is important, not just to Mark's story, but to the whole of Jesus' ministry and mission. Indeed, to the kingdom of God itself. And so with the knowledge of this truth, we can all ask ourselves a resulting question. If this loss of life was literally and concretely true for Jesus, might it also be literally and concretely true for us, for this community, for this world? Or perhaps we can ask that question in a slightly different way. In what ways have we also experienced losing our life as the key to receiving it back again? Have we ever noticed, for example, that when we give a gift to another, we recognize how much we receive in return? Have we discovered, on occasion, that it is only by loving another that we ourselves feel that we, too, are loved? Have we ever gone without so that someone could have more and feel intensely richer and blessed as a result? Or do we ever find that there's no better way to feel fully fed than to participate in the preparation, in the provision of food for others who hunger? Each of these examples may be small in and of themselves, but they are still vital and compelling glimpses of the inverted, upside-down logic of Jesus' kingdom. It is inverted, upside down, and turned over because it is so dramatically different than the logic that runs the kingdoms and the nations of this world as we know and experience them day to day through the weeks. The logic of this world, a way of thinking that we are taught from a very early age. It claims that the only way to find security and unity and even peace is through possessions and power, control. The logic of this world attempts to persuade us that the only way we can be happy is by having more, and that the only way we can be free and content is by having all our wants satisfied. It is a logic that operates on a notion of absolute scarcity, limited resources, limited health care, limited employment, limited access, limited forgiveness, limited words, limited food, limited goodness. And it is therefore a logic that pits us one against another in a winner-all-take competition for goods and meaning, for faith, hope, and love. It is a logic that we can't escape and from which we can't extract ourselves, dig ourselves out of, because it is the logic that drives our human, not divine, but human world. It's marketing, it's campaigns, it's politics, it's agricultural choices, it's decisions for health, it's conception of family, its understanding of community, and its very visions for the future. But then, into the midst, into the crux of all of this, also human logic, Jesus comes and points us to the divine. He urges us to give of ourselves, to give up our own selves and our own desires, to put others first, and to take up burdens on behalf of another. No wonder Jesus No wonder Jesus is not only disbelieved, but is rejected. He isn't just an unusual king, an unusual Messiah. Jesus is in fact an anti-king. He's almost the exact opposite of everything we normally expect to see in our kings, our queens, our prime ministers, our presidents. No wonder Jesus' true kingdom still has trouble attracting citizens. What he tells us today is that in order to enter, in order to become part of this kingdom, we need to be first. We need to be last, not first, except out in the gathering space where you do need to be in a particular order, as you will hear soon in the video. The rice is always last. As model inhabitants of this new nation, Jesus lifts up the most vulnerable people in the culture of his day. A Syrian woman whose status is on par with a dog. Children who are ranked only slightly above her. Outcasts, diseased, foreigners, others. Who can truly and really and honestly want to be part of such a misfit nation? What Jesus is proclaiming is an anti-kingdom, not dominant, not mighty, not exceptional, not first, but rather a kingdom of servants, a kingdom of slaves, with ill-equipped arsenals and absolutely no walls to defend themselves. A place and a land so utterly opposite of what we imagine a proper nation should be. Why then do we come? Why then do we come to Jesus? To be gathered and assembled as Christ's church. To be baptized and made part of this anti-kingdom that he proclaims. Maybe it is because this logic that seems so opposite to all else that we encounter in our human life invites us instead to discover our lives by receiving our identity as beloved children. And not by trying to define that identity through our accomplishments. We come because this Christ-given logic invites us to find our purpose in serving others rather than accumulating goods. It invites us to imagine that our life and that the lives of those around us have infinite worth simply because God chooses to love us, apart from anything we've done or anything we've not done. Why do we follow? We follow this anti-king, this Christ, because his kingdom is about life. Not the false life that we've been persuaded into by advertisers and others, because it's the best we can find or expect to find in a limited world. But real, honest to goodness life, where all people are received and loved as themselves, not as others would wish them to be. We come and we follow this Christ. That's the challenge. That's the challenge. And the invitation that Jesus offers us today. It's the challenge of denying ourselves, taking up this cross as a community and losing our lives together. It's the promise that in doing that, Christ the anti-king will be at our side and will show us that God still loves to create out of nothing. That God turns walls of separation into tables of sharing. That God indeed provides nourishment for the hungry. That God raises the dead to new life. Amen.